welcome to another episode of Just Us, a podcast about mental health in the justice system and how creative expression and purpose can be used to make meaning and cope. Today I have another friend joining. Hello.
Hello.
I think that you guys are going to really enjoy this episode also. If you listened to episode 1, you heard Jeff talk a little bit about Cruu, and that is who we have today. So tell us who you are and what you do.
So my name's CruufromtheNorth, and I am a producer, musician, and business owner.
Nice. Okay, are you ready to get into it?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, it's just us. So, okay, we're going to start from the beginning. You're from Brockton.
Yep.
Okay, so tell me what Brockton means to you.
What Brockton means to me. Brockton to me is home, first of all. And it is the sword, or I should say it's the metal that sharpens my sword. It's what makes me who I am. It's what makes my personality. A lot of the diversity here, a lot of the experiences that I have here make me who I am. It makes me Cruu. So that's Brockton to me.
I love that. That's the first time I've heard someone use that sword analogy. I like that. Did you like come up with that on your own?
Yeah, I don't know what I'm here for this. So
it's like right now, just thought of it.
I'm thinking about it. I'm hyper focusing in my brain, but I'm like, all right, what am I saying?
No, that was good. I like that.
Yeah.
So what was growing up in Brockton like? Like, what was your upbringing like?
I like to think that growing up in Brockton was pretty smooth for the most part. For the most part, Brockton has this. A lot of people look at the city of Brockton as like, oh, it's a bad area, and it can be. It can be. I've personally seen, the worst side of it. But growing up, especially as a child, was pretty smooth because my parents came here, from a different country, and they worked their hardest to try to provide for me and my sister growing up. So it was very easy to be a child and to understand how to kind of just grow up without being challenged too much. But that did change, later down the line when I grew up and became a young adult. So I'd say the growing up process was pretty nice. I got to experience a lot of diversity, especially being from Brockton, where everyone's from somewhere. Yep. And I think that a lot of the experiences really shaped me and taught me how to survive elsewhere. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think it's nice to hear it sounds like you had kind of a good balance. Like you grew up and, things were kind of good as a child. And then as you got older, maybe like your eyes were opened a little bit more to like the world around you and kind of like maybe also what else the city of Brockton can offer or has to offer in some other ways.
Right. Exactly.
And I know you said that your parents came from another country, so you're Cape Verdean?
Yeah, I'm Cape Verdean.
So they came here from Cape Verde?
Yes.
So what does that culture mean to you?
Being Cape Verdean means a lot to me, especially in this time now where we're starting to get a lot more exposure as a country and as a culture. I think growing up Cape Verdean, especially in a city like Brockton where the population is so heavy, it really helps me get to dive in on what my culture is and who we are and how we move. Because a lot of people don't get that experience,
Definitely.
when they don't really know their family roots or their family doesn't really tap into their own heritage or anything like that, and they're really just Americanized. Yep. So I'm very grateful, being Cape Verdean and being able to show that off when I have the opportunity to, and to be able to share that with other people in the community as well.
Yeah, I think it's special that Brockton has such a strong population and like such a strong Cape Verdean population, because not only, are you able to kind of learn that culture from, you know, your family, but then you're also surrounded by like people who, you know, have the same like traditions and values in a way. But then if you step outside of Brockton, or like certain areas, some people are like, what's Cape Verdean? And you're like, what do you mean? Because where I'm from, everybody's Cape Verdean. You're like, everybody knows what that means.
Yeah.
So I think it really is special. I feel like it's something that we often maybe like don't think about or like take for granted until we kind of step outside and are like, oh yeah, you know?
It's so interesting, and it's very fun to tell people about when I'm not like in town or in the city or in the state even.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm always proud to,
you
know, to let people know where I'm from.
Yeah, it's special to have that. I feel like, you know, not everybody has that sense of culture. So it's something that like you want to hold on to, you know?
Yeah.
I want to go back to something that you said about how as you got older and became a young adult, things maybe weren't as easy or things might have changed a little bit. So can you tell me a little bit more about that and what you mean by that?
Well, in general, you know, growing up, my living situation was pretty smooth. After, you know, my parents divorcing when I was in elementary school and getting through middle school was very tough to me. Not the schooling part, but, you know, having to accept another parent figure in my life that wasn't, you know, my original parent. So, you know, being at home with my stepmother wasn't the easiest thing in the beginning.
Yeah.
And from there, I kind of had to find ways to become independent because also growing up in the Cape Verdean home, you weren't really allowed to be as expressive as you want to be. Mm-hmm. So certain things that I want to get off and I feel are reasonable for me to express to my parents or specifically to my father at the time wasn't really encouraged. Mm-hmm. And it was more so looked at as like, all right, you're trying to be disrespectful or you're trying to question how we parent or anything like that. So it was very hard for me as a teenager trying to get through school and not being attentive at school because I wasn't a academic focused person. I was very heavily into who I was and what my interests were, which was mostly music since a child. So trying to get through school and still having to deal with certain issues at home and try to fend for myself and be able to, you know, push forward was very hard. So ended up getting into me not moving out of the house, but me moving into the basement of my home. Okay. And living on my own, essentially, eventually when my father did move into a new house. So I refused to move into the new house, and I stayed there out of my own peace of mind. Mm-hmm. But after that came the hardship of trying to be an adult faster than I needed to be. Mm-hmm. And I learned quickly that, you know, there's a lot of responsibility and a lot of things that I have to take responsibility for moving forward. So it was a hard time after that.
Absolutely. And so you said you were in middle school when your parents divorced and everything happened?
When my parents divorced, I was in 5th grade.
Okay. Yeah. That's a tough age just to kind of go through that too, because you probably had a lot of questions. And then how old were you when your dad moved and you decided to stay where you were?
When my dad moved, at that point I was 16 years old.
Oh, wow.
So I was already halfway through high school.
Okay.
And I still had about 2 years to finish high school. And then, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. It's a lot at a young age. And it was probably confusing a little bit. And, you know, you're kind of trying to navigate and figure out what you want to do. Did you feel like your parents weren't going to be accepting of you wanting to do music and what you kind of like really were passionate about?
My mother was very supportive of everything I did as a child. And I think most part because she realized that I had known what my interest was and she wanted me to just keep doing what I was doing because I wasn't in a lot of trouble at that moment in time, or that period of time. But my father wasn't the most supportive when it came to that. He was more traditional when it came to, school and stuff like that. And, you should go to college or become a doctor, lawyer, engineer or something.
You're like,
but
I
he's
am
really
becoming an engineer, just a different type.
But it's funny because like he's really the reason why I found my interest in music early on as a child.
Oh, wow.
I got my first computer when I was like 3 years old. I was learning how to burn CDs when I was almost 4 years old.
Wow.
I was playing around on the piano early. He put me in classes when I was about 6. So it's really like him that gave me the opportunity to gain interest. But, as he's seen me develop and focus heavily on it growing up, he was kind of noticing that, well, his interpretation of that was that it was becoming a distraction from school and, moving forward with my life. But that was what I wanted to move forward with.
Right.
So.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
You're like, you did this. And so I know you also said that it was hard for you to maybe express yourself at home, or express yourself in the way that you wanted to. Was mental health ever talked about when you were younger?
In the household, no. Besides, the very little that they tell you in school, in health classes and stuff. In the household, I was never really, spoken to about mental health, or that wasn't a discussion in the household. So,
yeah, and that's not surprising. I think that's how it is for the majority of people, and I think culture plays a role in that too. Like I know I'm Portuguese, and I feel like Cape Verdean and Portuguese are pretty similar in the culture. And, working in the mental health field and like trying to explain to my family, like they're like, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean see a therapist? Or like, what do you mean talk about this? They're like, just talk to God. Like, that's all you need.
Exactly.
And it's like, but you can do both. So yeah, it's not surprising. And I think that, it was one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast in the first place, because it's like, I feel like we all kind of know, okay, yeah, that wasn't talked about when we were younger. And then we grow up and we're kind of like figuring it out and we're like, oh, like life is hard.
Right.
But I feel like we don't talk about the fact that it's not talked about. And like so many people can relate on that. Like, yeah, we grew up and just didn't talk about it, or we learned about it in school.
Right.
Like, and we really didn't learn that much about it in school either, when we think about it. So how did you, as you grew up, how did you come to learn about like mental health and what it was? Or like, did you have experience with mental health, or did you learn about someone else that you knew of?
Growing up, I was always the friend who gave a shoulder to lean on. I was always the friend that gave an ear, gave advice.
Yep.
So I noticed, in my teenage years, what it was like to deal with people who, had depression or had, a lot of anxiety, paranoia. And growing up as a teen and young adult in Brockton, I also know what it is to, deal with people who have trauma. Trauma that, you can't really speak about with your average therapist or something. So I think more so in my high school experiences where I started to make friends and start to experience their mental health issues through what they had to tell me and what they had to discuss with me.
Yeah. You brought up a really good point about a lot of people dealing with trauma and maybe not feeling comfortable talking about that trauma to many people, not alone like the thought of, going to see like a therapist to talk about this, because it's like, how are they going to be able to understand or relate, to what I'm going through or what I went through. And I think a lot of people in Brockton have probably dealt with, I mean, and not just Brockton, but like just because it's kind of like what we experience.
Yeah.
A lot of trauma and a lot of different things that maybe a lot of people don't really think about or see in other places or like towns.
Yeah.
And a lot of that stuff goes, I don't know if untreated is the right word, but like it's not dealt with as good as it probably could be because, again, like we don't talk about it.
Right. And I agree. I think untreated is a good word too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, and then it, I think, just becomes like a vicious cycle. And, you know, some people do find an outlet and a way to kind of express themselves in some way, but that's not always the case either, you know? And then people end up in maybe worse situations or, you know, down paths that they maybe didn't think that they were going to end up in the first place. Do you think that it was hard for you at times to like always be that person that people went to? Like, who did you go to? You know what I mean? Like sometimes being that person.
Yeah, that was kind of the issue. And that's where I didn't notice until, you know, years of development, that not having my own person to talk to was gonna end up, you know, putting me in a position where I was feeling the same way, or I was going through the same type of issues mentally. And always being that person that, you know, gave advice or gave, you know, the hugs out and gave the shoulder to lean on. It really just made me more solid inside in a way, or I would say emotionally, where it became harder to kind of just like get through to my feelings sometimes when I'm speaking. And I think in general, as a man, like we all grow to be, you know, that type of person where we grow up and we can't show, you know, the emotion that we want to show because we have to survive and we have to move forward and you know, be the strength that everyone else needs. So yeah, that's like another, you know, weight that a lot of men carry, you know, and is another thing that I think needs to be more normalized is like, you know, men have feelings too. And it's okay to talk about it. Yeah, that was a big thing in November. It was what is it? Men's
I don't know if it was
mental health awareness month. And like, I didn't see too much content, or I barely seen any content on it. And it was weird. But I also didn't really know that it was celebrated in the month of November until like we were almost through with it. I'd say like a week before the month was over. And I was like, wow, I didn't know that.
And it's interesting that like society, and again, I feel like everything goes back to culture, but like culture, I think also plays a big role in like gender norms and gender roles and, you know, that kind of a thing also. So it's like you add there's a layer of this wall of like mental health not really being spoken about, and then add that to like gender roles and gender norms of like, oh, and you're also a man and you need to be doing X, Y, and Z, and like don't show weakness or show strength and be, you know, like you said, kind of like the thing that holds it all together. When you're just trying to hold yourself together some of the time, like, so I think it's so important. It's so important. Do you feel like you ever came like when do you feel like you got to a point where you were like, okay, you know, I am kind of in tune with my feelings. But yes, I have this culture and I'm also a man. And like, how do you navigate that now? Do you feel like, I guess just where do you feel like you're at now with that identity? And it could also still be like a work in progress. Yeah, it's like, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I just asked like 6 things at once.
No, it's okay. I think that in my early 20s is when I first started to actually realize that I had, you know, that's when I first started to really experience anxiety for the first time. I feel like anxiety, I wouldn't say inexistent, but I feel like I didn't know what that feeling was to have anxiety until my early 20s. Yeah. And from there, I started to realize how important it was for me to filter out my feelings somehow. I still didn't get to the point where I was communicating them between peers or family members or loved ones. I was just in a place where I just used the music to kind of just fuel whatever fire or whatever I was feeling. And that was somewhat of a healthy way for me to output, you know, or I would say that was like a healthy coping mechanism for me.
Definitely.
But there was still a lot of feelings that were like sheltered and stayed inside because I didn't feel comfortable speaking about it.
Right.
I think now, having been through deeper holes, you know, darker places, I've realized that it's very important to be able to speak on these things. But it's also very hard when people come from different culture or different background or different experiences. And, you know, luckily I have people around me that go through the same things or experience the same things or even experience these things with me where we can speak about it and, you know, be honest and vocal about how we feel about it instead of trying to act like things are not bothering us. But it's still very hard to vocalize or be given even the opportunity to do that with someone. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel, and that's why I, you know, at the end there, I was like, you know, it could still be a work in progress because I think a lot of times it is, and I think it is for everybody. Like even me being someone who's, you know, in the mental health field, like I'm still a work in progress when it comes to that too, and like my identity with, you know, things that I go through and how I express that, or like who I feel comfortable talking to, and or trying to hide it sometimes, like putting on a smile, and it's like, oh no, you know, I go through shit too, whatever. And being able to also, I think, just acknowledge and be aware of that, of like you said, you know, sometimes it is still hard. It's important. And speaking of like dark places or darker places, do you think, or I guess, do you remember if the justice system was ever talked about when you were younger?
I think just like mental health, we didn't really speak on the justice system, you know, in the household. Obviously at school, they give you like a rundown of how the justice system works, and they tell you, you know, the justice system is fair, and that everyone has an equal opportunity in the justice system to fight for, you know, their rights or fight for their freedom or, you know, testify for whatever reason. But, you know, when you grow up, I feel like we all kind of realize like there's certain things that go to one side or the other side, and it's not, you know, all as easy as it was told when we were younger.
Definitely. And I feel like schools need to do a better, well, I think everyone needs to do a better job, but schools specifically, I think sometimes they don't realize the impact that they can have, and like know your audience, you know? So like you might be teaching a group of kids who have already dealt with the justice system in some aspect, or have already learned in their own experience about the justice system. Or you might be teaching a group of kids that have never even heard a word about what the justice system is, and have that, maybe that privilege to not have to learn it in their own way at a young age.
Right.
Or you might have a mix. And so I think it's important to be more realistic, I think, when it comes to that, and like what we're teaching our kids in school, and, you know, and being realistic about that. Do you remember outside of school, maybe when your first experience was like learning, maybe like, oh, so maybe what they're teaching us in school is not exactly what's really going on?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have too much experience with the justice system until I was like a young teen, probably my last year of middle school going into freshman year, where I was, you know, we're at the age where we're just kind of just playing recklessly when we're with our friends, and, you know, when we're, you know, out and about, and we're just doing like very risky things as kids. and you end up running into a police officer or someone who catches you or who sees you, or even from my experience, like not doing anything and just still being questioned and harassed by an officer at a young age, just because we're on a certain street, or we're around certain people, or they notice that we're related to certain people.
Yep.
So I think early on, I kind of seen the shift in, can I really trust an officer to keep me safe and protect me, or at least be a role model to me and show me the way. So I'd say around like middle school, like late middle school to early high school is when I started to see that shift.
Yeah. And it's like that question, and again, that not everybody has, and due to like privilege in some capacity of not having to one day question, like, can I trust the police? Are they really here to help me? Or not have the experience, like you said, of like not doing anything, but maybe just because who you're related to, or who they, the street you're on, or what you look like, and different things like that. And again, that's all stuff that like they just really don't talk about,
right?
Or even how to deal with the police. Like they don't say anything else aside from like respect the police or whatever they say. Right. I don't even remember.
I feel like we lose a lot of leverage as citizens because of that, because we don't know the laws. We don't get taught our rights early on, and we get taken advantage of, especially in communities like this, where they'll use that lack of knowledge to take advantage of the situation and put you in an even worse situation.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's true. We really don't learn about like the law or our rights or anything like that. I feel like the first time even I really like, and again, I acknowledge that I think this is like a privilege in some capacity, that I didn't learn it until I like saw on TV. I think like they were talking about whatever, like, or like, you have the right to remain like whatever, like, you know what I mean? And I'm like, what is that? Like, but again, it really is. It's something that needs to be taught early on, especially when there's that like disconnect of what you're learning in school and then what you're seeing outside of school.
Right. I'm glad you said that about the TV, because it's one of those things where like we grew up watching police shows, and we grew up watching police shows, and like we see officers doing their job on the shows, like they're stopping specific crimes, and they're for the most part taking care of it the best way possible on TV.
Yep.
And then you witness those same situations in real life, and you see that it's not always that simple, and it's not always that clean, or they're not always being that honest or that protector that was supposed to be having in the community.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and it's such like a weird, I feel like Brockton especially, I don't know, it actually like boggles my mind how there isn't more discussion in school. Well, I guess actually I shouldn't say that, but well, no, because you went to school in Brockton.
Yeah.
Right. So I didn't go to school in Brockton until high school. So, but it sounds like it wasn't really talked about that much, even in like elementary, middle, whatever.
I think, there was a lot more programs, at least in the times. There was a lot more programs before my time, or before our time, I should say, where they did have, law enforcement and stuff involved in the education system, like the DARE program and all that stuff. Right. Like when we first started hitting like that preteen age, or like even like that age where like 9, 10, 11, the DARE program was kind of just like fading out.
Yep.
So we didn't really get to experience that for us.
That's
and
so
I feel
true.
like the lack of that type of education or that type of experience now is what makes the newer generations move so much more recklessly in the community, because they don't have the guidance.
Yeah.
And that goes as far as like even the generations before being able to replicate that for them, because we didn't have that as well.
Yeah. And I remember when I went to Brockton High, You know, and God, I don't even know what it is now. I feel like it's not the same, but, or it may be worse. I'm not sure. But we had Brockton like school police, and like now that I can like look back and reflect on that, I feel like it's like by that point in high school, it's too late. So like there's already people in that high school now that are afraid of police,
right,
for multiple reasons, or don't trust them and whatever else. So it's like, cool, we have the school police officer here. Number one, in my head, I'm like, I don't even know, like, what do you guys do? Like, what are you doing? Or why isn't that talked about more maybe? Or like how they talk about like community policing and like having police that live in the community and go out into the community,
right,
so they can kind of build that trust or attempt to. But by that point, it was already almost too late. Like I think in junior high, and even earlier, you know, I don't know, I guess what age is appropriate, but it needs to be talked about a little more. So then you're not going to high school and you already have a bad, like you already have a certain view of cops, and then you go to school and there's one at your school every day and you're like probably on edge a little bit, you know? Yeah. And Brockton High was very diverse, so I'm sure there was a mix of people and people's opinions on the school police and like whatever. But it's just it's interesting, and I never really thought about it when I was in school.
Yeah.
And now that I can like look back, I'm like, there's so much more we probably could have done.
Yeah, a lot more. I think a lot more, especially for the generations now. For us, I notice it now, and when I'm like, I look back and I was like, I wish I had this. I wish they had done this for us, but I look at the newer generations now, and I'm just like, I really wish they had, you know, they would bring back certain programs or do more, you know, to gain trust and show that they can cooperate with the justice system. But that also includes showing that in the community, though, not just in school, because we can go to school and learn, you know, how to communicate with an officer or how to work with the justice system, but then we go back home and then we see our older cousin going through something with an officer, and it's not the best experience for us to witness, and then everything that we learn is kind of just questioned. So yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you feel like your views on the justice system have kind of like evolved and changed from when you were younger?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, fortunately, in Brockton, we don't have a lot of the issues that we see on social media that happen in other states and stuff like that, which I'm always grateful for. You know, when these things happen and get, you know, super publicized on the media, but there is a lot that I do see, and it's, you know, it makes me think sometimes about
definitely
where we could be.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, I feel like Brockton, it's funny because I feel like when you watch the news, you see Brockton and like, oh, this happened in Brockton and this happened in Brockton. And then people who don't know Brockton are like, oh my God, Brockton's such a dangerous or bad place. And it's like, you know nothing about Brockton, like, you know?
No, but it's so crazy because we take that narrative and we become boastful about it too sometimes, you know?
Yes.
Like even now you see like they'll make like a list on like social media, like the most dangerous places in Massachusetts. And then you want Brockton to be number one so bad, but you don't, obviously.
Yep.
You know, you just see that in the community in a certain demographic. Obviously, they're being boastful about that, but that also goes into like media and exposing certain narratives and like music and stuff like that too.
Yeah.
So
it's wild.
Yeah.
It really is. Speaking of music, I know you said you started learning about music and like playing the piano and stuff like that at a really young age. So when did you first really get into music, and what led you there, would you say?
My interest in music was there since a child. Like I said, you know, with my dad, he was always playing music in the house. He was always, you know, burning CDs and stuff like that for other people. So he had like a variety of music. a wide variety of music, and I was able to experience that young and enjoy that as a child, and growing up and learning to play the piano for a short amount of time. It didn't last super long. It's like a year and a half, but enough for me to have the interest in playing on a daily basis and messing around and exploring certain programs on the computer. As far as like getting into production, when I was 9, my uncle was already producing and kind of recording himself at home, but he was making Zouk music, Cape Verdean Zouk music. So I first learned how to produce a Zouk beat, or a lot of people say passada. So I learned
that was the first.
Yeah, that was the first type of beat I learned how to make on a program. So
that's dope.
I took that and I kind of just ran with it through middle school, and then I learned, the art of sampling and getting deeper into like R&B, hip hop, and looking up to, Kanye West, Timbaland, Jay Dilla, and just wanting to be like them.
Yeah.
And early on, from a young age, I knew what I wanted to do. I don't think I ever woke up, even as a child, and thought I wanted to be something else. Even in school.
Yep.
Even in school, teachers will ask you like, "Oh, like, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And it was musician.
Yep.
So, unfortunately, I didn't get that type of support from my parents, where they pushed me to go further with that. But I did it on my own, and I carried that through my teenage years into high school, and became known for that in high school, and got to the point where I am now.
Yeah.
But it took a lot of doing for myself and kind of just like proving. Specifically, I think I moved with a lot of emotion towards my father because he didn't support me the way I thought, and I believed in myself so much back then.
Yep.
But now, we're in a place where he sees what's going on, and he's supportive of what I'm doing. So
that's good.
Yeah.
Do you feel like music or your work with music affects your mental health in a positive or negative way?
I think my passion for music helps me with my mental health. The fact that I am a musician trying to make it in a big industry, or even just trying to make a living, it becomes detrimental to my passion, because it can kill your passion when you're not getting a certain level of output, especially when you're trying to chase a career. It's easy to make music as a hobby, but when you have the pressure of the world and you're trying to provide for yourself and do bigger and better, it gets a little bit draining.
Yeah.
And when other things add to the state of your mind or your emotions, it becomes harder to create, which can make it even harder to use music as a coping mechanism because everything's distracting you.
Yeah.
So I think I look at it as like a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
Because it's so hard to communicate that to, people that watch you do it every day. They don't understand how important it is for you to create, and they don't understand how much it affects you when you can't seem to create.
Yeah, and like find that motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true actually. And I don't know if I ever really thought about it like that until I asked you the question, and I heard you starting to answer it, and then I kind of had a feeling that you were going to go that route.
Yeah.
Because as much as it can be used as a coping mechanism and to express yourself, at the same time, it can be really stressful and draining, like you said.
Yeah.
So then that also takes a toll on your mental health. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Or like on the flip side, it's almost like a cycle that then you, again, kind of like you have all this buildup or, anxiety, feelings, stress, whatever. And then you, like you said earlier, you kind of put that into the music.
Right. And it a lot of times it's like that. A lot of times it's like you have that buildup of emotions, and maybe you're in a block creatively. You can't create because of everything going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to a certain point where like you don't know how you're going to feel mentally. And then you have a breakthrough creatively somehow, you know? And then somehow it just all, I wouldn't say it all flushes, but a lot of it gets filtered through just by that one way of coping. And then eventually it just cycles back again. It's weird. It's weird. But it's interesting because statistically, like 70% of independent musicians actually struggle with like mental health issues.
Yep.
I don't know if it's illnesses.
Yep.
Probably statistically, I wouldn't say that they're illnesses. I don't think that everyone statistically is treated or diagnosed.
Right.
But poor mental health is also a mental health issue. So
interesting. Yeah. So like even if it's like a certain level of like depression or anxiety or whatever it might be. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. But that it makes sense. And I actually was telling somebody earlier today how like sometimes I view mental illness or just, you know, we'll just use mental illness for lack of a better term. In like it's like, how do I want to word this? As a beautiful thing sometimes, because it's like what your mind can do is so fascinating. Yeah. And like some of the most brilliant or most like artistically talented people struggled with mental health.
Right.
And it's so interesting, but like we forget about that because we just think like, oh, like they're crazy or whatever. And it's like, well, no, like maybe let's not use that term or like, let's try to take that term away from it because there's so much else going on. Right. You know?
And I think what makes that even easier to understand is that I'd say like 95% of like the greatest artists that ever live or that still live today have been through a lot growing up, and they've had to use you know, music as a coping mechanism somehow, sometime in their life, and that's what kind of just made them flourish, is the fact that they can express that openly and be able to provide for themselves. Absolutely. And we consume it because we hear these little things in their music and we relate to it, you know? Yeah. But we also tend to ignore a lot of the signs, especially in like rock and hip hop music. We tend to ignore a lot of the signs that someone is going through something. Yep. Our favorite artist may be going through, you know, a mental breakdown. Yep. But we're so addicted to receiving more content from them because it's helping us go through a mental breakdown. Right. Because they feel what we're feeling. Yeah. But we don't think that in the moment.
Right. Like we're bumping during our struggle to their struggle, basically. Yeah. Like we're in our room, like bumping to their struggle because we're struggling. And it's like, wait a second. Like, and I could probably guarantee that those people also did not have a space to talk about mental health growing up. Right. And they found music and, you know, that's kind of what they did. Yeah. That's interesting. Who do you think would be your most notable artist that you've worked with so far?
Most notable, just in general that I've worked with, or just like production wise or anything? Because I've worked with different artists in different settings, different styles of like. Okay. You know, I've engineered certain artists. I've produced for certain artists.
So maybe in general then.
Biggest or most notable. Most notable. I mean, I've dealt with like French Montana back in his early like come up. I've engineered him. I've produced for Babyface Ray, who's a big artist now. Yep. I've been in studios with A Boogie. Yep. But I wouldn't know who to say is the most notable out of those. Yeah. But I've been around and worked with some big names. Just I never really think about that type of question, to be honest.
Well, was there ever a moment where you were like, oh, like I'm really here right now, or I am capable, or like I'm doing this?
I think most of that feeling came from, you know, my personal endeavors. I wouldn't say personal, but working with someone like D the Fly is, you know, where we made a lot of big moves coming from where we come from, which is here. We've done a lot here that shifted the way that the music scene is kind of going now. In addition to others, you know, like Cousin Stiz and everyone who came before. But I think the things that me and him have done together gave me those feelings that you're saying.
Nice.
You know? Because those were moments that I, like I mentioned earlier, I got to prove to myself, and I got to prove to someone like my father, or, you know, other people who may have doubted, you know, this long road that I've been taking. We got to show everyone that it's possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think I get a lot of the strength and motivation from the fact that I've already done something large scale without having to tap into another person who's already has a platform.
Yeah, definitely. Do you feel like you have a favorite artist that you've worked with? Or like someone that you really enjoy working with? Which, I mean, in a way, it sounds like D the Flyest might be one of those people, but...
Yeah, of course. I mean, because we also share a lot of the same struggles. We share, working with him is like, it's like therapy for both of us.
Yeah.
We both get to share how we're feeling before we work, and we both get to put those emotions into the work.
Yeah.
So,
that's dope.
He is one of my favorite, but I'm not sure who is my, like, these are things that I don't think about.
Yeah.
Obviously. And there's a lot of different, I wouldn't say a lot, but there's a few different artists that I prefer to work with for certain reasons.
Right.
So for D, it would be that. For someone like Quez, who is an artist that's coming up right now out of Arkansas, his work ethic is crazy, and I like the way that it keeps me going. And then, you know, you have like people like Dale Thompson, who like creatively has so much going on in his mind, and he's always thinking of these ideas and how can we translate this idea into like a sonic version. And it challenges me because I'm like, all right, I'm trying to get the same output as you're envisioning in your head onto this digital audio workstation. So it's like, there's a lot of different people I prefer to work with for different reasons. I don't think I have an absolute favorite though.
Yeah. It's nice though to kind of have like a variety and be able to, I'm sure that continues to challenge you in itself.
Right.
When did you kind of switch from, or not switch, but when did you add like making your own music in there as well? Because you have, obviously you've been producing for a while and you know, you do a few different things, but then you also have some of your own tracks. Yeah.
It's funny because I've always like dabbled like on the mic just because I have it. Like I've always just done things with like my friends, especially down when we were in the cellar, still in the basement. I used to mess around a lot and kind of just reference things for people and like try this and do that. That's where I first got the taste of like actually like recording myself, like for real, because I did when I was a child. But you know, when you're a kid, you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And one day I just made a record early in the morning. It was like I pulled an all-nighter. I was up at like 6 a.m.
Wow.
And I was about to go to work. I was working part-time at the time. I was about to go to work, and I just pulled this reference out of my ass basically, and I mumbled half of it, but then I thought about it. I was like, this sounds kind of good. So I just showed it to D for fun one day, and he was like, yo, I like this. I'm about to put a verse on it right now. I'm like, it's not even like done. I don't even have half the words. He was like, but still, I like it. I'm about to put a verse on it.
Is this one time?
Yeah.
Wow.
So he records on it, and he puts his verse, and I'm like, damn, he did a verse. Now I got to finish it.
Right.
So I finish it, and then I'm still thinking like we just did it for shits and giggles. Then one day we play it, like the final version, and people are like in the studio just listening, and they're just like, this is good. And he's like, yeah, we're going to drop it on this day.
You're like, wait,
I'm
what?
like, what? We're dropping what?
Oh my
God. Yeah, we ended up dropping one time, and that was kind of like the start to like where everyone was just like, you should continue to make your own music. But I think the first time I thought about really making music was when I was just experimenting rapping like a few months before that.
Yep.
Or I'd say like a year before that. Before one of my cousins passed, I did a cypher. Fab was doing the Deeper the Music ciphers, and I went as like a spectator, but I ended up just doing something.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah, and then after that, the other Fab from Brockton Mag invited me to do a cipher for his platform. And then my cousin at the time was like, oh, you should just keep rapping. Like, you're doing your thing right now. You should keep rapping. He ended up passing that summer.
Wow.
But it just stuck with me after that. And I was like, maybe I should try to do my own music. So I just kept experimenting until I got to the point where, like, one time dropped. And then after that, I was like, all right, they want music. So let me just give it to them as a, like, I'm going to give it to them when I'm comfortable.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
And it's just been that way since.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a good story. Do you feel like you enjoy making your own music more, or do you feel like you enjoy producing and engineering for others more?
I like producing.
Okay.
I like producing. That's like my first love.
Yep.
I love producing. But I'm also very into creating. Like, I'm very into like the creating process. So like when I'm engineering, I like to coach an artist through a record because sometimes they can't hear something that you hear or that the people in the room hear. And obviously they might not communicate it most of the time. So I like to take that step and coach them through it and be suggestive throughout the whole process and create something good or even challenge them in a way.
Yeah.
A lot of times I have people try things that they don't really think that will sound good, but when we end up doing it, it comes out really good. So I like that feeling where I can push someone past their mental boundaries.
I think that's probably has to be like one of the most satisfying feelings is like being a part of, but watching a project kind of like come to life and then like hearing the final thing and being like, wow.
I love executive producing like projects. I wish I could do more of it, but there's not too many artists that I can really sit down with for too long. Yeah. You know, there has to be like the right person.
Yep. So I want to make sure that we talk about Cellar Boys because we're both wearing Cellar Boys merch.
Right?
So
Cellar Boys? No, I'm kidding.
Tell me kind of like what this idea is and just how it came about.
Okay, so before Cellar Boys became like a brand, I told you guys that in my teenage years I had to kind of just move down to the basement and just kind of be on my own. And I had 2 rooms in the basement. At first it was one. I had 2 rooms, but at first it was 1 room and it was just my bed. And then like my whole setup on one side of the room and then like a closet. And every time my friends would come through, we would just be chilling in my room. They'd be sitting on my bed. I'd be sitting at like the station and we'd just be like creating. You know what I'm saying? This is back when I was like messing with like Mars, Jeff, my boy Silas, Adam Cooper. And I would have certain people come through like G.O.D. from Boston, Avenue. And from there, we just created like kind of like a camaraderie. We had got like another producer, Lucas Loyalty, and we just kind of just was in there all the time, just going back and forth, like shifting off and just creating all times. It was not a good situation at the time because like since I was in the basement, I didn't always have the luxury of having heat too. So we used to struggle down there, and early in my adulthood, like we were broke. So we would share a lot of meals. We would be down there and they would stay, and then we would all be sleeping in like random places. Cause like they're sleeping on the bed, I'm sleeping in a chair, or someone's sleeping in closet with like a blanket. You know what I'm saying? It was just like, it was so bad. And then eventually we got to the point where like I had 2 rooms, studio, my own room, and then the studio we started calling the cellar. And from there, we just started calling each other Cellar Boys because we was always in there. And just, you know, rocking out every day, whether it was like music-wise or just like creatively in other ways. And it just got to a point where I was like, you know, I'm going to use that as a branding point.
Yeah.
And I started the Cellar Studio. And then from there, I was like, we're going to do the Cellar Publishing Company and then the Cellar Boys brand. So
Yeah.
that's how we got to this point.
That's
It wasn't.
dope.
It was never really like a thing where I just was like, I'm going to start a clothing brand. And
Right.
it was more so just based on like a culture
Yep.
for us.
And it kind of just happened.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the best when it happens that way. So I guess what can we expect from Cruu from the North, but also Cellar Boys moving forward?
For me, you can expect a lot more production. I've been very heavily focused on production this year. Trying to get myself in a publishing situation.
Mm-hmm.
Music wise, I've been getting hassled in public or in gyms, and people have been telling me to release more music. So I definitely got something for everyone, like the beginning of the year of 23.
Nice.
But Cellar Boys, I'm just trying to, you know, make everyone feel included and make everyone understand like what the vision is.
Yep.
And that's to push, you know, creativity to a global level. And eventually I want to build the brand big enough to be able to donate back to certain, you know, causes and especially to certain communities where there needs to be more programs for like creatives and visual artists and musicians and stuff like that, especially back home in Brockton. You know, some of the things that happen at the schools with like the budgeting and stuff like that. Eventually that's what I want to be able to like contribute to. So
that's awesome.
Just working on doing bigger and better.
Good.
So just be on the lookout.
Yes.
If you see something you like, please do support.
Yes, absolutely.
Get a piece and keep spreading the word.
Definitely. Tell the listeners where they can find you and Cellar Boys.
So you can find me on all platforms at Cruu from the North. That's CRUU from the North, all proper. That's on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You can find me on all streaming platforms at the same name. And you can find Cellar Boys on Facebook and Instagram at cellarboysglobal and www.thecellarglobal.com. I love you too.
Oh my gosh. Well, I want to thank you. I think this was really good. I learned so much about you, and I hope that everyone else, you know, I hope everyone listening will learn something as well. I think it was really fascinating to hear kind of like how you started and then where you are now and how you're just kind of continuing to grow the brand and like you as an individual, and as a producer and all of the things. So, I'm very excited. I'm excited for everyone to hear this. And thank you for being vulnerable.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course.
I really like what's going on here. And I was a little nervous about coming here and speaking on certain parts of my life. But I'm glad I came and we could share this experience.
Good. I'm glad. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for sharing. Thank you for being vulnerable and, you know, kind of letting the people in a little bit. Yeah. I think that everyone's really going to enjoy this. So I'm excited. That's about it. So like, comment, subscribe, do all the things.
Smash that like button.
Yes. And share, follow, you know, go follow Cruu from the North and Cellar Boys Global.
Please.
And look out for the amazing merch that's going to be happening and all of the
You
things.
see it?
Yes. And yeah, thanks guys.
See ya.